Welcome to QLab. Today we'll be exploring how to grow salt crystals. Now I'll be using sodium chloride as one crystal will be growing and copper sulfate as another. Now if you'd like to follow along, I suggest you follow with the sodium chloride because copper sulfate isn't very nice to handle, but it does give beautiful blue crystals. That's why I'm using it. As before, all the equipment is listed in the description box. Let's get started. I'm going to grow nice crystals from this. You can see it's not very crystal, it's more granular. But we're going to grow some lovely crystals of ordinary table salt, and you can follow along with that. And then what we've got over here, now this is something called copper sulfate. Now I wouldn't do this at home because it's not very pleasant stuff. You can see it's not crystalline at all, it's a nice powder. And there's a few hazards with this, so I'll be wearing my safety specs and lab coat. Don't want to get this on me because it can irritate my skin. It's not good for you at all if you ingest it. That means put it in your mouth. Don't put chemicals in your mouth anyway. And also, it's very dangerous for aquatic life. That's fish and things that live in water. So I won't be putting this waste down the sink. And the first thing we're going to have to do is dissolve up these two solids. And I've got a little bit of warm water, and it's warm to the touch. I had half a glass of cold water and I just added half a glass of boiling water, and then I stirred them together. So it's nice and warm, but it's not too hot at all. What I'm going to do is add some of this, and we'll start with salt. And in fact, I'm not going to use the pipette, I'm just going to pour it. So I've got my nice beaker here, I'm going to pour some in here. Now the idea is that I'm going to dissolve up lots of this salt, and I'm going to get a solution which is really full of salt. And then I'm going to let that solution cool slowly so that the salt can crystallize really nicely. Now the slower it can cool, or the slower, that the crystals form, the bigger they tend to be. Now, I've dissolved up almost all of the solids, and I'm fairly sure that my copper sulfate isn't totally pure. As you can see, it's a bit cloudy in there, and there's some, what seems like little white bits that aren't dissolving, so I don't think it's very pure, which means I'm going to want to filter these solutions. I want to filter them anyway because it's good practice. So let's deal with the salt first. Now I've just got a simple plastic filter, and I've put a little bit of cotton wool in there so that it's going to catch any little solids that are left behind. So what I'm going to do is take another cup like so. We can put that in there, and then I'm just going to pour the liquid into this funnel. And so after a little while, we've got a nice filtered salt solution, sodium chloride in water. And what we're going to do is we're going to do exactly the same for the copper sulfate solutions. And so there we have it. After some time, nice crystal clear copper sulfate solution. There was actually a lot of white gunk in my copper sulfate, and it seemed to be some kind of gelling agent. So it blocked up the cotton wool very quickly. So what I decided to do was use a piece of kitchen roll instead. So we've got our two solutions, we've got our copper sulfate and our sodium chloride solution. And it's super simple now. I'm going to leave this one in a beaker. And the reason I'm going to leave it in a beaker is I want it to evaporate very slowly so they get some nice big crystals. But what I'm going to do with the sodium chloride, let's move that out of the way, is I'm going to place the sodium chloride solution in this dish. It's large and flat. Let's see if I can get better. And all I'm going to do is just pour the solution in. I've cleaned out the bottom of this so it's nice and clean. And I'm just going to pour all of the liquid in. And that's just to give large surface area. This will evaporate slowly. And what we want to do with these two solutions, we just want to put them somewhere where they can evaporate nice and slowly over a long period of time. So I'm going to put them in a windowsill and then we'll check back on them tomorrow. Well, and here we are. Now I have to admit that it's actually been a lot longer than a day. It's been 4 days. It's actually been very busy, and this has taken a little longer to crystallise than I thought it would. We're going to filter them through paper towel. Pour the liquid into the funnel. In fact, we may not need to collect them out of the paper towel. It might just be that we collect them out of the tray. That's that done. And if I hold this up, can you see all those little cubes? They're the sodium chloride crystals that we're going to collect. So I'm just going to use a pair of tweezers like these to collect a few of these crystals to show you. So here we have just a few of the crystals we collected, and you can see the really distinct cube shape of the crystals. Quite hard to see against the white paper, I know. So we can see they have these really square shapes, and some of them, in fact most of them have this little white bit in the middle. All those two are stuck together. Have a little white part in the middle there, and that's called an inclusion. It's where the crystal structure hasn't quite formed correctly, and they have a lot of them, but these are lovely looking crystals. And if we compare it a little bit to what we had before, you can see this is all granular. It's not uniform at all. It's just granules, but over here we've got these lovely, almost like little gems of crystals. So these took about 4 days to grow, and the copper sulfate ones, well, we'll come back and have a look at those when they're ready. So I have to own up to making a mistake. It started to crystallise out in the beaker, and I picked some of those crystals out and I thought I'll pour it into a tray so it crystallises better and they don't all just link together and make one sort of cake of crystals at the bottom of the beaker. Well, that was unsuccessful because I had to transfer it with a little bit of extra water and it dissolved everything back up. And so this is going to have to stand for a while. However, I do have some crystals to show you. Some lovely little crystals of copper sulfate. If I use my magnifying glass, you can see on this one particularly the really distinctive, there we go, parallelogram structure. Let me see. And that's really distinctive of copper sulfate crystals, lovely blue crystals. Let's compare that with the powder that we started with. So this was the messy powder that we had. Can you see it's just all granular, nothing particularly nice about it, it's just powdery. And over here we have these lovely shiny blue crystals. They're not the neatest crystals, but they are very pretty. So we can see that we can crystallise material, and especially in this case from impure things, because this had some gunk mixed in with it. And we can get these lovely crystals, and we can actually use the shape of these crystals and certain properties of them to tell us about the molecular structure. So you can remember with sodium chloride there were those little squares or little cubes. Well, they're parallelograms. The shape tells us a difference and the colour tells us a difference. That's a really powerful technique. So crystallising something gives us something bigger to work with, but also tells us a little bit more about the properties of the molecules we're looking at. I just thought I'd put this brief clip in about how we deal with the waste from this video, because copper sulfate is not very pleasant stuff. But if you can remember from the reactivity series, well, we can add a little bit of iron and it'll displace the copper in copper sulfate, and we'll end up with iron sulfate and copper metal deposited on the iron powder. Now this will take a little while, but iron sulfate is actually good as a plant food. So you can add it into compost and whatnot. And so it's really easy to get rid of. And of course, metallic copper, well, that's no worry either. So we've dealt with the problematic, worrying copper sulfate and made two innocuous things. There you can see that the solution is going colourless, and there's this fascinating sort of orange copper that's appeared. Now, iron sulfate is actually pale green, so it won't go completely colourless, but you can see it's nowhere near as deep blue as it was before because of this reaction. So I'm going to leave this to finish off, and then it can join the rest of my waste. I'm going to feeding some of my roses. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I know it's been a bit more of a technique type video, but we're going to be using these techniques next week for quite a wacky project. If you'd like to follow along with that project though, you'll need to start collecting eggshells now. So I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.